Critical Reception, a Black History Month panel discussion.
I'd like to introduce our four panelists. Starting first is our moderator, Jessica Thompson. Jessica earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Communication Arts and Sciences from Michigan State University and a Master's of Science from Concordia University in Student Personnel and Administration in Higher Ed. She works for the University of Michigan Health System and she has worked for U of M Health System and the University of Michigan Student Life for over 10 years in several capacities. Her passions are deeply rooted in social justice, emotional intelligence, identity development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Jessica? Next on the dais is Rochelle Riley. Rochelle always works with two phones. She's a columnist for the Detroit Free Press, where she's a leading voice for children, education, competent government, and race. She is the author of The Burden, African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery, published last year on Wayne State University Press. She's also the co-founder of Letters to Black Girls, a project that grew from a single presentation to a national mission to pass words of encouragement from Black women to girls. She makes frequent television and radio appearances, including on National Public Radio, MSNBC, WDIV Local 4, WXYZ TV 7, and Fox 2. She has won numerous national, state, and local honors, is a global traveler who has been to 28 countries and counting, and was a 2007-8 Knight Wallace Fellow at the University of Michigan. She was a 2016 inductee into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame and will be a 2019 inductee into the NC Media and Journalism Hall of Fame. Welcome, Rochelle. Next up is Dr. Heather Neff. Heather Neff is the author of 7 novels and a professor of English at Eastern Michigan University. She studied at the University of Michigan before completing her doctoral degree at the University of Zurich. Among her many teaching awards, Dr. Neff has received Eastern Michigan University's Distinguished Faculty Award for Excellence in Teaching, the EMU Alumni Association Teaching Excellence Award, and the Holman Success Center's Outstanding Faculty in the Classroom Award. Neff was also named a Michigan Distinguished Professor by the President's Council of the State Universities of Michigan. Neff currently serves as director of the Eastern Michigan University McNair Scholars Program, a federal trio program which prepares first-generation and underrepresented students for doctoral studies. Under her leadership, 100% of McNair participants have obtained a bachelor's degree, and over 82% have gone on to graduate studies. Welcome, Dr. Neff. Last up, we have Jamall Bufford. He's been a recording and touring rap artist for over 15 years, performing in over 15 countries, both as a solo artist and a group member. He's currently a member of rap's first performing arts group, the Black Opera. When he's not focusing on his own music or leading youth workshops on writing and hip-hop culture, Bufford is a special needs paraprofessional right here at Tappan Middle School in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So welcome, Jamall. So we should have a lively conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, who's prepared the questions, and we're just going to let it ride.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, and good afternoon, panelists.
Hello.
Good afternoon. So as we sit and think about even the title of this program being called Critical Reception, who do you feel gets to sit in space with regard to critical reception of Black history?
Dr. Neff, we're looking at you.
Reception is in terms of receivers?
Space holders, those who can engage and share their thought, inquire.
Golly. Boy, you're opening up a can of worms for me. I guess I would put it to you like this. I have always been troubled by the notion of a Black History Month. I would like to see Black history saturating every aspect of what we do as an American culture, understanding that Black people were brought here in the role of servants before the Mayflower, that we provided the economic substructure of the entire American economy from its beginning, that slavery had to have been a highly successful economic method, or it wouldn't have gone on for centuries, and that at the end of slavery, we have quite successfully pitted working class people of all colors against each other from the beginning of our nation to the present, and that this is the calling card of our current administration and forms the basis of his political, what would you say, his political machine. So critical reception. I don't even know how to begin to talk about my dismay that I've been teaching for 30 years and that my students today are as ignorant, in fact, more ignorant of their historic culture than they've ever been. I find in the college classroom that many of my students of color don't understand what the word Negro spiritual means, much less know anything whatsoever about African nations, African culture, African philosophy, thought, religion, or identity, and that what is being spun for them in terms of hip-hop, but mainstream, highly controlled images that are put out by the hip-hop industry are not necessarily helpful to their understanding of themselves as young black men and women, or young people of color who should share kinship with people of color from other cultures. So I don't want to talk too long because I think we have fantastic people here to share or to add to this, but to start off the discussion, I think that to try to encapsulate who we are as a culture within 1 month is in fact very troubling, almost to the point of insulting. And that if we really were to do our work right, we wouldn't need these programs because everything that we could possibly share with you would already be known.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add, and I think people typically know the history of Black History Month, that Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded it as Negro History Week. And to think that it's taken decades for us to go from a week to a month, I can't agree with Dr. Neff more. I am quite frankly, disheartened by the fact that we continue to settle for a month's worth of study. And I wrote a column, it's been at least 4 or 5 years ago, advocating getting rid of Black History Month, which caused some people to lose their minds and set their hair on fire. And I explained in the column, but sometimes you have to read the column to people, that I am not suggesting that we don't study Black history. I'm suggesting that American history is not complete without it. And if we don't start teaching it that way, we are doing a disservice to children of all colors. What Dr. Woodson said was those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history. It's not just those who have lost that history of their forebears, it's all the other people who don't have that history of accomplishment and achievement and what African Americans did to help build this country. I don't think we'd have a racism problem if we taught all American history, because you wouldn't have little white children thinking that black people literally are just the descendants of the enslaved, and you wouldn't have black children thinking that's all their forebears did. So when we talk about occupying a space, I hate that we look at history as a space to be occupied instead of a living, breathing thing that we have been teaching wrong for 400 years.
Thank you.
I'll just add that as someone who's been working in public schools, mainly here in Ann Arbor and with young people for the last 9 years, it kind of just seems like right now Black History Month is literally just a term, and it's not really, if it's not going to be something that's implemented and really taught in schools, you know, the people that are most formative right now and need this information, then really what is it for if it's not being in schools? You know, a lot of what I learned about Black history in defense of my beloved hip hop music, I learned from hip hop artists, not in schools. And then, you know, a little bit younger than these amazing young women, but I haven't been in school in a very long time. And even when I was in school, I don't remember much of it being taught in schools. A lot of it I learned from family, friends, hip hop music. So yeah, if right now, if it's just a term, then, you know, what is it for?
Thank you. Thank you all. So when we sit and think about, again, the critical reception and the stories of resilience, when we think about Black culture, what can we say Black history is not? Because to me, it is not slavery and let's begin the educational process. That's not where it started. So what is it to you, and or what is it not?
It's not just the past 50 years. I think we spend so much time focusing on a fight for civil rights, which still don't exist in equal measure in this country, that we don't teach the history of Africans. And to teach about African Americans without teaching about Africa, to start with post-colonialism and not ever talk about anything that happened before. I'll tell you a quick story. So when my daughter was 4, and my best friend, who's Lebanese, went to pick her up for me. I was a executive at the Courier-Journal in Louisville, Kentucky. And anytime I got tied up in news meetings, she would go and get her from school. And she called me up, my friend did, in tears, and said, she's so upset and I don't know what to do. And I said, have you all been in a wreck? What's the matter? And she said, no, we haven't been in a wreck, but she's just really upset. And I'm not sure how to, I said, tell me what happened. No, you don't tell me. Let me talk to my child. Mm-hmm. And I said, what's going on? And she said, they didn't pay the brown people. I said, I'm sorry, honey, what has happened? She said, we did this in class, it's Black history, and they didn't pay the brown people. And Mom, they did all the work and they didn't get paid, and that's just not fair. And I said, well, what else did they teach you? And she said, well, Martin Luther King freed the slaves, and after a while they got paid. And I knew from that moment that all of my daughter's instruction in the history of African Americans in this country and before had to come from me.
Right.
And that is something that every parent and every teacher should be aware of, because literally, I know what I had to do, but I know that there are children in that class who probably to this day think Martin Luther King had something to do with freeing slaves. And that is a part of the problem. That is why we still have people who think that Black people in this country have no ability to accomplish, that the wealth gap is deserved because we are not as smart as people who make more money.
Or hardworking.
Or hardworking. And it's because of how we teach our children. So until we do that, and one other quick story, I moderated a panel a few weeks ago, and this gentleman in the back of the room, and this was a packed room of people in the Rochester Hills School District, which has its own problems with race, and where the retired firefighter shot the shotgun at the kid who knocked on the door. And he stood at the back of the room, a proud Black father, and he said, how do I get my son's teacher to understand that I want to be involved in his education? How do I get her to understand that I want to be involved and help? And one of the panelists who I had just met that night, she said, let me first of all say, without meaning any harm, that you are insane. And I was moderating the panel, so I'm like, oh God, how do I bring this back to? But she explained, she said, we take our most precious cargo and send them off to complete strangers and put them in their hands and expect them to be educated properly, treated properly, when we haven't done any vetting of the teachers. We don't know what their prejudices are. And you're standing there saying, you sent your son off and put him in the hands of some stranger who's been horrible to him, and you're surprised. It blew me away. I had never thought about that in the history of my life. And we have to change that. First of all, we have to pay teachers what they're worth and pay them enough to be good teachers. But second, we have to change the idea that people can be whatever they want to be to our kids, and that we're not teaching them, but then we expect them to grow up and be different.
I predominantly work with students at Eastern Michigan that come from first-generation families. What I find is that the students have no larger social structure to understand how they came to be in 2018, 2019, first generation, and so wholly unequipped to make the transition from high school to university education. You know, my argument is that we ended slavery on paper, and, you know, the Reconstruction is the most important period in American history because it really is the moment where we see the emergence of the America we live in today. And the Reconstruction amendments, the 13th that ends slavery, the 14th that provides equal protection to all people regardless of color, sex, gender, religion, and then the 15th Amendment that gives us the right to vote. The minute those were put down on paper, it gave people that were opposed to equality the precise framework. They knew exactly how to go at preserving a social structure that was intended to exclude the majority of people in the country. And I always want to remind everyone that women didn't get the right to vote until 1920. and that poor whites really didn't get the right, and still don't have the right to vote, and that we have plenty of poor white people in the country who live very much like poor black people, especially in very rural communities. The infrastructures are not as difficult in some ways against them. But here's what I want to say. The same things that were done to enslaved people under the process of slavery continue to exist today. When we talk about the fact that many students, many young people, many adults experience housing insecurity for much of their lives, live in housing that's not only substandard, but they can't afford to own, so they rent, so they move, and that a life of housing insecurity means that you don't have the kind of time and the kind of safety to sit down with a child and read to the child at night. Many people live in environments with what we call food deserts, and we were talking about the fact that Jessica's in the process of establishing a food pantry at Michigan. We as well have to have one at Eastern because we have students who don't have enough food to eat, students who are living in their cars. So that many people grow up thinking that a bag of chips and a pop is a meal. That we as people who come from low-income communities inherit, even within our DNA, medical challenges that come from having been given such poor diets and living under such traumatic stress from the moment of birth to the moment of death, so that we're born with the genes that make us more likely to suffer from diabetes and heart disease and blood pressure and autoimmune illnesses that are wholly a part of not only our lived experiences from birth to death, but the lived experiences of our ancestors. And that our children arrive facing challenges unlike challenges that the majority population can even conceive, that many of their teachers have never known, that many of our administrators don't want to know, and that we have work to do that goes not just, it goes beyond Black History Month, it goes beyond just inserting Black history into our curriculum, although it obviously needs to be there. But there are things that young people are faced with that are so. This week at Eastern, I think if you're following the papers, you know that we had a young Black student who's pre-med, he's a junior, he's honors, he's on his way to becoming a doctor, who went into his toilet and found someone had lynched a Black doll. Imagine the fear that a student has to deal with every moment, on top of the fear of being Black and male, and will he be shot? Will he be accosted? Will he be stopped when he drives? And then peel that back to all of the additional layers that these students have to cope with every moment of every day. So see, it isn't about a month. It's such a, oh my God, it's such an enormous thing. And those of us who do this work, who walk with it and try to help, you can't stop and allow yourself to be overwhelmed. You can't stop and allow yourself to think, this is crazy, I quit. And we try to focus on all the ways in which we overcome. But it is, as we now begin to look at the overarching trauma and the largeness of it, and then we see a leadership, I think if we hadn't had Obama, we'd feel differently. I think Obama made it obvious to us that it is possible to have an uncorrupted leader. Because believe me, if the man had been corrupt, they would have brought him down, because God knows they were watching every aspect of his life to find a way. I think it almost hurts more what we're dealing with today, because we had 8 years. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates said for 8 years we were in power, right? I'm going to stop because I'm about to go off, but I'm saying that sometimes the whole notion of Black History Month is such a bad joke. When I think about the fact that nothing I have ever had to deal with is what many of my young people are dealing with right now. I just think it gets worse, not better. So I'll stop.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think she summed it up perfectly. And you see it every day with the young people that I work with. It's really amazing that they even get up and go to school every day, honestly. But on the other end, school is kind of like their escape from what they're dealing with at home. So when the best meal of the day you're going to get is at school, you're going to go to school. When you don't have to be around that person that might be abusing you, you're going to go to school. Now, what happens when you get there is a whole nother thing. When they get to school, then they have to deal with people who aren't equipped to teach them, don't understand what it's like to be dealing with trauma. So teachers see you sleeping in class is because that kid didn't sleep at all because he or she is afraid that if they close their eyes, something might happen. They don't understand. A lot of teachers, not all, but a lot of teachers don't understand that. So yeah, it's deeper. It's a lot deeper than.
And what we have to remind our students is that they have to be extraordinarily strong or they wouldn't be here.
Yes.
You know, that's what the message you have to continually remind them when they feel broken, is that the fact that we've made it this far suggests, I mean, we're all scholars up here. Du Bois said, you know, that it was only our dogged strength that keeps us from being torn apart. And fortunately, because I know my history, I can lean on Du Bois, I can lean on Frederick Douglass, I can lean on Maya Angelou, you know, I can lean on these people who give me the word, and oh my God, Audre Lorde every day, you know, who says we were not meant to survive. And because I know that history and have those words in my soul, I'm able to, on my worst day, kind of dig in deep. And I tell to my students all the time, any of you who come from a background in slavery have to understand that there was an ancestor who stopped one day, who stood in that field and imagined you, who imagined that what they were going through and the fact that they chose to survive rather than taking themselves out was in the hope that a generation forward or two or three, you would be in a college classroom, you know, taking advantage of making something out of their suffering. And these are the kinds of things I say to my students when I look in their eyes and they're so hurt and they're so afraid, and I'm afraid too. And it helps for me to say to them that I live with fear when I'm outside of my house. About the only time I feel like I'm pretty much okay is at home, because I feel like we are in a community where the daily microaggressions pile on, but then there are actual real, you know, if I get stopped on the freeway, nobody cares what my title is. You know, if I reach for my wallet, I don't know what will happen to me. And we shouldn't have to live this way, but we do. So I choose to try to inhabit students with the idea that your education has excluded you, K through 12. No one mentioned the names of your ancestors. Nobody ever reflected on the fact that your people built this country, that your blood is in every brick of every building of this country, that, hell, the Catholic Church, slave masters, you know, when the original treaties were signed, they gave Columbus the right to bring us here. He paid a percentage of every slave. He tithed, quote unquote, to the Catholic Church, that the Vatican was built on the blood of slaves. This is history. We don't have to make this nonsense up. So I try to say to students, yeah, you're suffering. But like Maya Angelou said, you're the hope and the dream of your slave ancestors, so you don't get to quit. And if you were weak, you wouldn't have made it this far. My God. So.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No,
don't
thank you.
apologize. I do want to say this. I have one of those T-shirts that says, I am my ancestors' wildest dream.
There it is.
And I'm so glad that you do this, but not enough people do that, where they remind people. I don't know how many of you watched Scandal when it was on, but everybody knows the Daddy Pope speech where he goes off on Olivia and talks about how you have to work twice as hard and be twice as good. And it dawned on me, we've always worked twice as hard and been
Yes.
twice as good, because we had to deal with oppression while we were building the White House and while we were the economic engine for the entire South and part of the North. We always have been working twice as hard. So I'm trying to figure out when that stops and how we make sure that these children who don't know that history understand that that's the history they come from, and that we're trying to get to the point where there isn't a wealth gap that we talk about every year, like, oh, you know, it's just, that's the way life is. And we talk about not just the wage gap between black and white, but men and women, and the education gap, and the fact that schools are more segregated, and the fact that 90% of the kids in the Detroit public schools who are in the third grade don't read at third grade level. We just write these stories, we pronounce these things, and then we go back to have a cup of coffee. We don't actually deal with it. And if Black history is not a living, breathing part of American history, we continue to not do it. We have literally in this country allowed every time somebody says 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, we were just talking about Reconstruction in the car driving over here. Every time I think about those amendments to this Constitution, which we consider so sacred, and our government has been breaking the law for hundreds of years. The idea that we had to continue to amend and continue to beg and continue to fight. You know, we actually have on the books the law from 1920 that says we didn't follow the law from whenever okay, I'm done.
No, I love it, because the thing about that 14th Amendment, which actually provides that we should all be safe in our own country, it ends with the first half says, as long as you're born, you know, in this country, you have equal protection. But then it says, with the exception of criminals. So I say to my student, because I make them read it out loud, and I say, okay, let's break it down. Then I said, but look at the thing. If you have put into the Constitution that criminals don't get any equal protection, then what do you have to do to people you want to hurt? You criminalize them. You set up a structure where you stop them on the freeway, or you catch them with a joint, and you put them in the prison for 20 more years, where you take 14-year-olds and imprison them with grown men. What do you think is going to happen to these children? So you criminalize a population, and once again, this is going to sound terrible, but you repeat image after image after image of black men looking like something out of outer space. And I say to my students, I may like to listen to Snoop Dogg, but I don't want him living next door to me.
I wouldn't mind Snoop living next door to me.
Not if I had a daughter. You know, a man's a pornographer, right?
I mean, there's a lot. Yeah.
No, I mean, for real, the man's a pornographer. I don't want him living next door to me with my little girl growing up. So, and then you provide images of black women as oversexed, out of control, what's the word, gold diggers. So that you're criminalized before you wake up in the morning. There's a notion that's not just nationwide. Those of us who travel know you can walk into a cafe in freaking Italy and they'll be playing some Snoop sitting there smoking a joint that big. And so that before you as a young American said, you all know a couple of years ago, a young black man who had just finished a fairly prestigious college was beaten to death in Greece. In a cafe for saying something to someone in the cafe. And the State Department actually has a warning out telling African Americans, don't go to Greece because somebody will kill you there. And I'm thinking, where did the Greeks start thinking that this gentleman should be beaten to death? It's because we have exported images of black men as being less than human. We don't even need the Constitution anymore to say we're 3/5 of a human being, because, hell, we have a media that says it all the time in ongoing ways, and then exports those images all over the world. So the criminalization doesn't necessarily mean the cop that stops you and locks you up. The criminalization goes with a media that defames us and degrades us to such an extent that Katy Perry puts out she was in blackface. Yeah, and that we have a whole, Virginia.
So when we think about this time in our lives where we're actually, as black people, having to say out loud that my life matters, like I have to voice that for you to know that, what is this month? What are we even doing? Even as we sit here right now, what do we say to our children? What do we tell them?
I don't have children.
Yes, you do, because you teach.
But I do work with young people. And it's interesting. So a teacher at the school approached a young black man and young black child, essentially a sixth grader, and called him King. Said, "How you doing, King?" And he looked at her like, "What? I'm not a king. Like, why are you calling me a king?" And was almost offended at the fact that she decided to call him a king, and she had to sit him down and talk to him. But this is the ancestry that you come from. This is the lineage that you come from. You come from royalty. And the fact that no one had even suggested that to him was interesting. So when she seen me, she was like, whenever you see the young boy, I'll leave his name out just in case somebody might know him, but if you see him, call him king. Tell him that he's a king. Tell him to be proud of that. And, not having that in my schools growing up, right now there's a wall in the hallway. It's about 3 of those pictures over there. They have some historical black figures on the wall, about however many feet that is, right? It's cool that it's there. but it was never mentioned like an announcement. Hey, if you're in this hallway, check out this dedication to some historical figures in Black America. And if it's not announced, if it's not being presented in the classes, like, hey, when you walk down this hall, make sure you look at this, then it's almost like it's not even there. So I appreciate the effort of putting, and it took a teacher who just said, I have to do something. She did it on her own. It wasn't like, all right, this is Black History Month, we have to do something collectively as a school. Now, I don't know if that's just, this is Ann Arbor, Michigan, so, I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. I love my city, I'm from here, but, sometimes we have to get what we want on our own. And so the fact that it's there but not presented in a way that every child in that school goes to look at it and reads it is a problem. And again, in defense of my beloved hip hop, a lot of the history that I have came from the music that I listened to. And without that, my mom, I'm from Atlanta. My mom moved here when I was 3 years old. And, my dad left when I was 5. So it was really just me and my mom and my older brother. So my older brother introduced hip hop to me at a very early age. And, granted, a lot of this stuff isn't presented in the mainstream hip hop that's on the radio and on the television. But it taught me so much about who I was. It gave me pride as a Black person, as a Black man, to hear Black voices who represented something that I could be proud of. Too many to name, and I love Snoop. I listen to Snoop. I'm a fan of his music. He does say some very vulgar, derogatory things towards women, but he's also done great things. A lot of these things in our community existed before hip hop. They're the storytellers. They tell the stories that's going on. It's real stuff happening out here. And so when I work with young people who come and tell me the same thing about how they love Snoop Dogg and how they call women all these kind of names, things I don't promote and do not condone, my job is to present to them hip hop that does not do that, which is why I rap. I didn't hear that a lot, so I rap. So I was like, if I'm gonna be the person that's like, don't listen to that, I gotta put the music out there that I want these young people to listen to. So that's real. It is a lot of negative stuff in rap, but it's a lot of negative stuff in the world, and they're reporting it. Some people need to know what's going on in our neighborhoods. They need to know. If something's going to change, they need to know. So, but yes, the Black History Month wall in Tappan, it's good to see, but again, like, I didn't even know about it until I walked past and saw it. I get staff emails. It was never in an email. It was never discussed at a staff meeting that this was going on. So, in my growing up here in Ann Arbor, I remember Black History Month as mainly Martin Luther King, not a lot of Black Panther, not a lot of Malcolm X, definitely not a lot of our African history. And so I think part of it maybe is because Martin Luther King celebration is in January, and then right after that is February, Black History Month. So maybe they're like, oh, they do a great job with Martin Luther King. Don't get me, they have a whole assembly, have speakers come in, they do a great job, and then Black History Month is a couple weeks later, maybe they feel like we did what we had to do. We did our job. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about where we're at with regard to Black Lives Matters? And
Oh, I'm so glad you took us back to that. Yeah, it's so funny. We all know that Thomas Jefferson's a problematic figure. Yes, everyone nod. We all know that Thomas Jefferson has some problematic history, which is another piece of history we're very uncomfortable with talking about. The racial mixing that's gone on from the beginning of American culture that we're terrified to even begin to think about. And yet he provided us with the Declaration of Independence, which has been copied again and again by groups that want to ask for civil rights. So the document, which is called What We Believe, which was created by the three women who founded Black Lives Matter, the reason why it's such an incredible document is because not only does it go into issues of racial inequity, but it talks about gender, it talks about sexual identity, gender expression, socioeconomic issues, violence toward women, and violence toward people on the basis of race or whichever marker you want to use as a justification. It is actually an extraordinary document. And I always begin my class teaching it because students they think Black Lives Matter is just about black men dying. And they have no idea of the great scope of the document and the fact that three queer women sat down and put into a very clear, beautifully organized format all of the range, the spectrum of issues that we have to look at in a holistic way in order to really improve the nation. So as far as that entire movement goes, I think it is a vanguard. I think it changes the game from the civil rights movement of the 50s, which was appropriate for its time, but was homophobic, was not necessarily woman-friendly, and I'm not making this up, this is the kind of thing that Alice Walker, Audre Lorde, women who were participatory in the original 60s movement, have been very open about the fact that they were told to make sandwiches while the men marched. We have now had some really great documentaries on Bayard Rustin, who put together the March on Washington and then was excluded from it because he was gay and he was out. And of course, my God, James Baldwin, whose rebirth has finally come around at last, who was considered a great civil rights leader, but was always ignored for his fiction, which was very gay. And I think that as for Black Lives Matter, it hits all of that. And I love it. And I'm glad it's here. And I'm 62. So I'm really glad that it's here, because I think if we have to hand off this struggle to the next generation, there are people out there who have set everything up to start this conversation in a way that is relevant to what the next generation faces. And it actually asks us to interrogate, as Dr. King did, because when you read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, he says a movement can't just be a movement. You have to set your goals. You have to purify it, make sure people aren't in there who have you have to make sure you take direct action and then go do it. So even he says, get a methodology in place. Black Lives Matter is doing the same thing in really incredibly important ways. So
Thank you.
I'm glad I got to say that.
Quickly add on to that, actually,
please.
it's interesting with something that's kind of going on in current events right now. I just seen, so Don Cheadle was on
Yeah.
Saturday Night Live last night.
Oh, was he?
And he had on a shirt that said, protect trans kids. And for the most part, he was applauded for it, as I believe he should have been applauded for wearing that shirt. But of course, with social media, people are free to make their opinions on anything and have it widely spread. Social media is a whole nother conversation, the gift and the curse of it. But there was a couple detractors who were like, oh, so you get on TV and want to make a statement about this movement, but you wouldn't wear a shirt about Black Lives Matter or something like that. But I think kind of going off of the last comment is, I don't think those things are like mutually exclusive. Like, black people are trans as well. There are trans black people, and these kids are not being protected. And that goes along with Black Lives Matter. So I just thought that was interesting that someone felt that because he wore a shirt saying protect trans kids, that it meant trans kids can't be black or black kids can't be trans. So that was just interesting.
Oh, black trans women are in fact the most at-risk population in the country.
I want to mention one other thing. As a columnist, I get calls from crazy people all the time. But when I get the calls about Black Lives Matter, every single time, pick up the phone, Black Lives Matter, all I say is two. I'm like, what? I said, two. Black Lives Matter, two. Do you feel better now? It is literally just to remind you that it's just as important, not more important, not something that's going to denigrate you in any way, but Black Lives Matter too. And it reminds me that one of the greatest things that racist detractors do is to make us compete against each other in our pain and suffering. Who's suffering more? Who got hurt more? Is the Holocaust worse than slavery? If you fight for the protection of all types of students, does that mean you're not fighting for the protection of other students? Getting back to the T-shirt, why would somebody automatically jump to, he's got to wear 9 shirts and hold them out on his arms? Because if he wears one, then somebody's going to be upset. But it reminded me also of this idea that we still treat our story and our culture like it's exotic, like it's something unusual.
Nice.
So as a media person, and a lot of it is our fault, I was moved but also laughed about the story that literally went viral last week about the math teacher in Mississippi, Jovan Bradshaw, who did the door. She decorated the door like a bulletin board, and she put on it, some really great colors and said, "They didn't steal slaves. They stole scientists, doctors, architects, teachers, entrepreneurs, astronomers, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, and they made them slaves. Sincerely, your ancestors." And it was shared about 1 million or 2 million times by people who thought, yes, that's great. But like I said, next day, after a couple of days of its popularity, we go back to our cup of coffee and we don't think about that. If that's not an ingrained part of the history that we teach all of our children, we are not doing anything different. And when Dr. Du Bois said that the color line would be the problem of the 20th century, there was no way for him to know that it would be the problem of the 21st century. And if we don't do something, it's going to be the problem of the 22nd century. So we've got to stop competing with each other. We've got to stop teaching competing histories. I don't want a Black History Month, not because Dr. Woodson was wrong in drawing attention to it, because we need to, but we shouldn't be settling for a month, the shortest month of the year, to just celebrate and teach all children what they need to know about our total history. We have got to start doing it all the time.
Sure. Thank you all so much. When I am in the spaces that I am in at work or otherwise, I am finding, especially in the more educated spaces of campus, many times Black people have said it's too laborious to have to educate others about the history of our people. I don't want to have that weight. How do you feel about that? Is it weight? Is it laborious to have to educate about us, about our people, about our own history ourselves?
Well, of course, I'm sorry.
Please.
Of course it's laborious, but it's not picking cotton or being beaten or not having somebody teach it. Whose job? I want to know who said that to you so I can go and talk to them. Here's the problem. I get upset that I have this extra job. I tell people all the time, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the best college in the country. I know my U of M friends get so mad at me when I say that. And they say, "What did you study?" I said, "I majored in journalism and white people." And that is why I'm successful, because I've had a foot in 2 worlds my whole life. But I do not stand back and say, well, I'm not going to teach that history because that shouldn't be my job, if it means the history is not going to get taught. If I meet somebody who's never heard of Malcolm X, let me tell you a little something. If I meet somebody who literally doesn't know Sojourner Truth, let me tell you a little something. I teach Phyllis Wheatley because, my God. And the idea that we have all this excellence in our history, and because whoever these people are who set the curriculums and are still trying to move Black people out of the textbooks are not going to teach it, that we're going to just let it not be taught? No, it's a great labor. It's an unfair labor, and I accept it proudly.
Thank you. Any thoughts down there?
I agree.
That's what we do.
That's what we do. It's what we do. So you had mentioned 8 years we were in power. So the White House looked very different a little while ago. And so here we are experiencing a very different political climate. And we have, again, young people who we want to educate and empower. And having that face, Barack Obama, President Obama in the White House, that meant so much to my daughter. And I will never get over the day when it was named that Trump had won. And when I went into the room to wake her up for school, she said, "So did Hillary win, Mommy?" And I had to tell her no. And her reaction was one that I was not prepared for. She cried like I had never seen. And it was one of those things where she was like, "But Mommy, I voted for Hillary. They did a mock election in school." And I said, I know. But this is what it is now. And so I had to really sit with my emotions because I was totally caught off guard. But I think the other thing that just kind of smacked me in the face was President Obama was all she ever knew.
Yeah.
That was her president. And so now here she is in this very difficult time. How? How do we raise our children? How do we teach our children? What are we doing? Can we answer that?
Well, I can say one thing, we have to stop pretending that what is going on is normal. That's number one. I don't care whether the children are young or whether they're middle school, college, or quite frankly, some of my neighbors. This is not normal. This is not acceptable. This is not the way things should be. And at some point, we have to move things to someplace else. But as long as we're living in this space, we cannot pretend like this is normal. I am so upset at my media colleagues, and I have to get off Twitter. I'm worse than Donald Trump on Twitter sometimes because I watched that press conference. Now, some stations, CBS went to The Price is Right after 20 minutes. I'm so proud of them. But I watched it all because sometimes you just have to know. But I got so exercised by it and by the fact that I was literally watching somebody who seems to be mentally ill. And so I tweeted, I am waiting for one of my colleagues to stand and ask, are you high? And I was very serious because when you go back and look at it and you see the things that are said, the way they were said, it looked like Alec Baldwin SNL skit. But they tried to ask serious questions. He told people to sit down. I don't like your station. No, we're not talking about that. He said things that weren't true yet again. And this is the history that some of these young children know. This is what they're listening to the president say it. So how do they know it's not true? And he's teaching them not to trust the media. So how do we teach them it's not true? So we're making some history now that it's going to take a long time to get over. And as long as we have someone in the White House who is a bigot, who does not believe in, to call total countries assholes, to denigrate, to lift up as not so bad people who are racist, to watch mega hats be turned into modern hoods and not say something about it. We all knew what he meant when he said we're going to make America great again.
Oh, yes, we
knew.
did. Absolutely, we did.
And he's still trying to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Thank you.
if we, as a culture, still believe that democracy in any kind of way does exist, if we still believe the electoral process does exist, let's assume, everyone in the room, that we still can vote and vote somebody different into office in a year and a half. Let's assume that. Then it behooves us to get on the ground and make sure we have gotten people registered and we get them to the polls. I think that that's all. Did any of us really believe that Obama would win? I remember thinking from the beginning, I don't care if he's God, they're never going to let this black man be the president. And it happened. So I think we have to believe that it can happen, not necessarily a black person, but that a person of moral decency and strength and honesty, I don't care about the skin color, can get back into office. But I think we can't waste time being diverted because look, at the end of the day, you know what, dealing with Trump is, the cat where you get the laser beam and you go running after the laser beam. I think what his people are really good at is him deflecting truth by just giving us some nonsense to follow. And I watched the news stories the day Manafort got in trouble right away, the wall thing ramped up. So that everybody's like, oh my God, he's going to, national emergency, the wall, the national emergency. When in fact, what I'm interested in is what Manafort's getting ready to tell, the Mueller investigation. So I think that where his strength is really in that his people are very, very good at keeping us guessing about all this craziness up here. And we're not paying attention to what we really need to pay attention to. At the end of the day, though, let's hope and pray that there is a chance that we really could legally elect somebody, then we already know what we have to do. We already know what we have to do. We have to get young people hopeful that they can bring change about because we need them to vote. We need them to vote. Because everybody in this room, we're all a part of the demographic that actually votes. Everyone I'm looking at right now, we're the age group that votes. You are too.
Absolutely.
He looks much younger than he actually is. It's shocking. But the 27 and unders, they're on the social media having a great time worrying about Cardi B fighting with, what's her name?
Nicki Minaj.
Nicki Minaj, the cut and paste girl, everything plastic from top to bottom, So all I guess I'm trying to say is we know what we have to do. We do know, don't we? Don't we, American people? We know what we have to do.
Yes.
So I think that's what we have to do. It's just make sure people get to the polls.
Yes, thank you. Any other thoughts down there?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think we just see it is not, like Rochelle was saying, is definitely not normal. But I think we do see the way that a lot of the people in this country think, whether it's normal or not, whether it's correct or not. There are people who agree with this person, and it just shows you just how deep the racial disconnect is in this country. Not even just black and white, but just between a lot of us. And when you think about, all right, black people make up what? How much? Like 13,
Yeah, we're
14
still at
or something?
13.
13% of this country. That's not a lot when you split the pie up, but there's a lot of things being in place to keep us out of positions of power, to keep us out of the jobs we deserve. And it just shows you how powerful we are, that even though it's not, I could see if it was 50-50. If this country was 50% black, 50% white, we got an even amount of people, let's just vote it out, whoever win, that's not the case, but it shows how powerful we are, that even though we're such a small percentage of this country, that we are disenfranchised a lot of times purposely. And, when you have someone in office like the current president who spews whatever he's talking about, it just shows you that the fact that there are people who agree with him on some of this stuff, just how far we still have to go. And I just recently saw a woman named Carrie Mae Weems. Did anybody see Carrie Mae
Sure.
Weems when she came here? I seen her speak. I didn't see, she had an exhibit here. She's a photographer, esteemed black woman photographer. And she talked about, during the time that Obama was president, the amount of black people that were being murdered by police during that time. And in those 8 years, the numbers jumped radically. I don't know the exact numbers. And then she kind of just threw it out there. You notice now that Trump's president, we haven't heard a lot about black people being murdered by the police. And it just kind of made me think that correlation, just something to think about. It shows, it triggered something. Like the fact that we had Obama for 8 years and we have this kind of polar opposite, it kind of shows you where a lot of this country is. The fact that there's race relation issues doesn't mean that, there's teaching right now in my class. We're doing a book called Dear Martin, and it's about young kids in a high school who are having to deal with race relations. One of the kids gets arrested unfairly, and his white kids are like, well, we've come so far in this country. And I think it's great that we're actually having this conversation with middle schoolers right now. And it talks about, well, we had a black president for 8 years. But it's like, if we have to still, when we get arrested, talk about, I didn't commit a crime. I was driving legally. I had all my paperwork, and we still have to deal with this in 2019. I think it shows that the discord that still exists in this country. And when we have young kids in the class talking about this amongst each other, it's great to see that they do recognize that race is an issue. I think it's great that we're not saying, we're colorblind, I don't see race, because race exists. And I think it's great that the young people are being taught this, that they can say, I I recognize that you are black or you are white. It's just I don't want to judge you based on that. You know, I don't want to judge your character based on the color of your skin. So the fact that we are in schools having these discussions, I think is great. But back to Carrie Mae Weems' point, she just threw it out there. Like, it's kind of like a chain reaction. Like, if you have something, it's kind of like yin and yang, I guess, for a better term. If it's something that is so this way, it's going to be a reaction to that in some way or form. And her point was maybe we had this great 8 years, but this country wasn't ready for it, and it was still backlash, obviously. And this is kind of like a reaction. President Trump is a reaction to that. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a reaction to those 8 years. Mm-hmm. And so how are we going to deal with that? What are we going to teach these young people in these next, hopefully it won't be another term of it, but these next couple years, how can we adjust our young people? Because that's what, we're getting them ready to vote. We are at the voting age, but now, it's good to see a young person back there who might be younger than 18, I believe.
He left.
Oh, he did? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how old are you, young man, back there?
Oh, there's one.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that you're here is awesome because we need to have these discussions with people who are about to become voting age. And these are the things that we need to be preparing them for because this, it shows how far we still have to go in this country.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you all so much. And I want to close this out by just asking you to finish this sentence. My Black history is, and so I'll go. My Black history is the breath in my body and the legacy that I leave behind for my daughter. Next.
My Black history is the knowledge that slavery did not end. It just moved from plantations to boardrooms, classrooms, newsrooms. And we have to get to the point where we stop teaching Black history separately. So my Black history is American history.
Yeah, I love it. You know what? I say to students all the time, I'm so glad I'm Black. And they always go, why? And I say because the experiences I've lived have given me a depth and a richness of character and an inner strength and a focus and a drive and a mission that has made my life so meaningful. Mm-hmm. And man, I wouldn't trade that for anything, right? Yeah, absolutely. So that's what my Black history is.
My Black history is daily, every day. One of my favorite rappers, 2 Chainz, you should check him out. If you go to his Instagram page, he has this hashtag that he started called Black Now Story. And what he's doing is he's spotlighting Black people who are making, whether they're inventors or politicians, Black people who are creating the history right now that we will be talking about hopefully in the next 20, 30, 100 years. And so I think that every day is Black history. Every day we go into these schools. Every day we get up to go teach. Every day we do these panels. Every day we write, create, exactly, is Black history. So I say my Black history is daily.
Thank you.
This program was recorded on February 17th, 2019 at the Ann Arbor District Library.